feeling? So what we have left for the knee, we have three more, four more knee flexion pullers, right? Knee flexors that we got to go over. And then we'll do some practice, make sure we're all on the same page on the knee. Then Wednesday and Thursday will be ankle subtalar stuff, which is cool because a lot of the same muscles influence both apartment complexes of two separate joints, but a lot of the muscles cross both. And so I'll show you how that works. And then if we finish on Friday, then we could do a formal review, any questions you guys have, and then obviously Monday will be the scheduled review before your exam on Wednesday the 3rd. Cool. All right, guys, let's talk about that hamstrings. So your ischial tuberosity, the origin of these muscles is basically your sitting bone, your butt bone. Back here, your ischium. So you have your ilium, the big shell shape, your pubis in the front, your ischium in the back, right? So these muscles originate on the ischial tuberosity. Membranosus, tendinosus, biceps femoris, long head, only one that crosses the hip joint posteriorly. When that muscle runs down, it blends in with the short head that starts from the distal femur, and they blend into one muscle known as the biceps femoris. So I'm just going to show you. See the short head and the long head blend in. They pull one rope. Okay. So at the knee, because both heads blend in to one common tendon, we don't have to be redundant. We don't have to say biceps headed, two-headed muscle, long and short head. By saying biceps femoris at the knee, that means both heads. How do we just say one head? Well, biceps femoris, long head is the only one that crosses the hip. That's how we use verbiage in allied health to separate the two. Meaning the short head isn't going to do anything by itself. The long head's going to blend in with it, but only the long head does stuff in the hip, and the short head doesn't reach the hip. Okay. All right. This is a little bit, people make mistakes, all good. This is actually part of your tibia for this picture. Your fibula head is actually here. So the biceps femoris long head, remember this is just an illustration, it's a picture. But the biceps femoris long head goes a little bit further down and inserts right there. And in fact, they even say it, which is correct. Insertion of biceps femoris head of the fibula. I think they just thought that was the head, but the head is actually up underneath. Athletic trainers, they say that your fibula is non-weight bearing and your tibia is weight bearing. The fibula is still weight bearing. It's about 15% or so, and that's why it's literally holding up a little bit. It's getting compressed out. So that's the fibula head. So it's going to be yanking on it. So the biceps femoris is lateral, and the membranosus, tendinosus are medial. Where they insert, geography, the pes anserine, a little bit further down, the medial tibial condyle for the tendinosus, the membranosus, and the tendinosus goes down to the pes anserine. Eventually, in some of your fields, knowing where they originate insert is going to be very important. Palpations and special tests and doing that kind of stuff. But for all the distribution of students that I have in all these different fields, what's more important for everybody's function? What does it do? And how do I know I'm using it? How can I stretch it? Right? That's the stuff that by now you should know that we emphasize in this class. So hamstrings, membranosus tends to be a little bit more medial in the meaty part. Tendinosus, and then biceps femoris. So the biceps femoris, when our knee is flexed, since it crosses lateral on the outside, it's going to be our only lateral rotation puller when our knee is flexed. And the others are going to be internal rotation pullers. And once again, the reason you have so many, now the biceps femoris is a horse. It's a big, strong muscle. But the reason we have so much redundancy for those knee internal or medial rotators when our knee is flexed is because of that cut and plant technique that we talked about. When you cut and plant, you create lateral torsion, lateral twisting of your knee. So having those extra internal rotation pullers there as stabilizers helps make sure our knee doesn't externally rotate too much. So let's look at them in the leg, at the knee. Semitendinosus crosses the hip posterior, crosses the knee posterior. You can see how it would be a flexion puller. See if we get a look lateral views. There's our membranosus. Again, I like to think of it as the membranosus comes more medially. See how there's like this kind of space right there? Look at that membranosus kind of pops. It's more medial. Membranosus, tendinosus, biceps femoris. Then our biceps femoris is lateral. Long head, short head, blending in with one content. Guys, I think this is a really good view. I'm glad I have this lateral view. Remember I said like when your knee is extended, fully extended, it's kind of locked into place. The natural condyles, your obviously your femurs are coming in at angles, but your condyles are offset to each other. So in other words, make sure I have. So in other words, your medial is a little bit further down than your lateral. So when the knee screws home into place and it kind of sits right there, the muscles that pull, look how like vectors, we talked about vectors. This is very little flexion component, if any at all, is what I'm trying to get at. Does that make sense? Like it would almost be like a rectus. There'd be no obliquity to it. So when you're locked into place, when those knees are locked into place, the intent is to save you energy. The intent is so that you don't have to use your quads as you just stand up waiting in line for 2 hours. Make sense? Your body wants to rest bone on bone to save you energy. So your hamstrings, very vertical. And that popliteus, though, as I told you, kind of wraps around that condyle, and that popliteus, as it wraps out, now has some verticalness, some horizontalness to its pull. And so that's why the popliteus will unlock the knee. Now your quads can activate to let you down and come back up. But it really should make sense that if you're standing in line for long periods of time, you kind of want to save some of those leg muscles. So bone is going to rest on bone in that position. I think this is a good illustration of how vertical those hamstrings are when you're in a column. You're locked in. But if something's locked, you got to unlock it. And you pop into this. All right. Look at how, so we talked about levers, 3rd class and 2nd class. At the hip, in open chain, when your feet are off the ground, those hamstrings cross the hip early and insert very far away from the hip, right? So very 2nd classy, very good at putting on the brake. When you're sprinting and you got to stop, those muscles are gonna, so like you typically like pull a hamstring when those muscles are eccentrically putting on the brake to slow down the momentum of all of your leg, of all the mass of your leg. But notice at the knee, they insert very proximal, very close. Crossing close. So in other words, that was what we talked about, 3rd class speed. In other words, just a little bit of contraction distance is going to create a big sweeping range of motion in our knees. Does that make sense? So when I'm trying to flex my knee really fast, those muscles would be very advantageous leverage-wise for fast flexion. Make sense? We have some fast flexors in our hips. It's not the rectus. Rectus crosses early and inserts very far away, but the iliopsoas crosses and inserts very close on that greater trochanter. sorry, lesser trochanter, all that iliopsoas has to do is contract a little bit of distance of big sweeping range of motion. Okay. The gastroc, though, is kind of cool. The gastroc gives us a second class type of slower but yet stronger because it has an advantage of moment at our knee. So the gastrocnemius doesn't just work at the ankle. The medial and the lateral head cross the knee. See how it crosses the knee? So if we're going from proximal to distal, top to bottom, it crosses the knee early and then goes all the way down to your heel. So like if you're doing heavy weight and you need flexors, those hamstrings are like, dude, I'm strong, but I don't have mechanical advantage. I'm a speed at the knee kind of muscle. So having a muscle that has more of a second class function where it inserts far away can really help. You know, we talked about it, like if I was going to raise a heavy ladder, it's a lot easier to raise it up if I'm attached at the furthest rung. The closer I attach that rope to the rung, the harder it's going to be to raise that. So the knee functioning, sorry, the gastroc functioning at the knee is to aid in not fast flexion, but heavy loads that we might need our flexors for. It's like if you're doing hamstring curls and you're doing some heavyweight gastrocnemius is like my specialty. Another cool fact is that if you're flexing your knee really fast, remember I mentioned this in levers. Usain Bolt, who would be a sprinter lever, can choose to jog and run slow, but I can't choose to run as fast as Usain Bolt. So when you have fast knee flexion, your sprinter knee flexors are like, sweet, that's what I do. The gastroc is a slow knee flexor. So it's like, I can't contract fast enough to keep up with you guys, I'm out. And think about it, if you're doing something really fast, it's natural that you wouldn't do it heavy, because to do heavy things means to do them slow. We talked about the load velocity curve, right? You can't do heavy things fast. That's like, hey, I'm about to do my 1 rep max, and then you do it fast. That just should make no sense. So when you're doing fast flexion, like when you're sprinting, it makes sense that the gastroc's like, dude, you don't even need me. And I don't specialize in fast flexion. You guys got it. If you're going slow or you're going heavy, I'm your help there. Right? The gastrocnemius is our only knee muscle that has a secondary function at another joint, at the ankle in this case. Okay. So for your lists, you go to gastrocnemius. Breakfast for the digit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow, I forgot the 7. Okay, guys. So this is why you come to class. Watch the videos. So on your iPad or on your notes, put gastrocnemius, and I abbreviated with GAST because I think I'm trying to make it stand out from Priscilla's. So GAST is gastrocnemius, and it's a knee flexor and an ankle joint plantar flexor. Let's see if I write that. Spell it. Let's do what I do with spell check. So you have it in your circle, in your knee circle as it should be. I just must have forgot to add it into your list. Okay, so you can add it. You either write it or on your iPad, write it down. Okay. So we've actually talked about it before, but since the gastroc is the only biarticular muscle at knee and ankle, there should be strategies that we should know and be able to apply to lengthen it or shorten it, depending on if we want to stretch it optimally or want to increase its contribution in one or the other. Okay. So here's an example. If I wanted to increase, let's say I was doing, let's say, doing you know, I understand like we gotta call these things something, but like from my perspective, like you're working more than just the hamstrings, right? But that's what we're speaking. All right, so watch this. If you wanted to lessen the contribution of the gastroc as a knee flexor, in other words, let other knee flexors do a little bit more of that work, that external force work, a question you should be able to answer is, well, what position do I want to put the ankles? Right? Do I want to, I could tell my client, hey, point your toes down, point your toes up. Because by stretching it, by dorsiflexing, and you lengthen it at the ankle, it's going to pull more at the knee. So if you plantar flex and you slack it at the ankle, it's going to contribute less at the knee. As an example. Now, again, it doesn't mean it's going to turn off. That just means the other knee flexors have to take up that slack if you put it on slack. Hip position, understanding, and the people that design this equipment, that's kind of some of the things they do, especially for the adjustments, right? So if I'm working my knee flexors and my hips are more flexed, I'm going to lengthen those hamstrings at the hip. So if I stretch them more at the hip, they're going to pull more at the knee. If I want to lessen, again, not turn off, lessen their contribution at the knee, I need to do this exercise at an more of an extended position, right? And maybe the machine could adjust to do that, or maybe you can do a TheraBand and you place a pad under their hip to kind of get it into an extended position. Maybe you do manual resistance, but you're trying to extend the hip to put those muscles more in slack at the hip because maybe you want to emphasize other knee flexion pulls. Maybe you position the hip and the ankle because you want to try to there's all kinds of tricks that we can do because of the biarticulation of certain muscles that we have in the body. If we were trying to stretch the gastrocnemius optimally, would we want our knees to be flexed or extended? Absolutely. Extended. Absolutely. We want our knees to be extended, and we'll be able to play more with this kind of question on Wednesday when we're going to dorsiflex. Maybe dorsiflex at the ankle and extended at the knee. As soon, and you know this, we did that with the hamstrings where like your knees are extended, you feel that stretch in your hip without even moving the hip. I flex my knees and I lose the stretch because I slack them at a different joint that they cross. So it kind of be the same thing with the gastroc, right? My knee is extended and I'm dorsiflexed. I feel that stretch, but as soon as I flex my knee, that stretch goes away because I just slacked it at the knee. You may want to do that if you want to stretch other plantar flexors that aren't affected by knee position, right? You may want to flex the knee, get that gastric on slack, and then you can dorsiflex more because it's not your limiting factor to stop your range of motion. Very useful. Very useful stuff. All right. Right now, I'm going to talk about, I'm just going to introduce you to the why. So, just going to introduce you to the why, that's all. I think I've been very clear in what I'm going to ask and what I won't ask, things I'm going to emphasize. Check this out. If I can get it right. Knee, ankle, hip. Wow, that might be the best one I've ever done. Super. It's light. It's close. Everybody see that? When you're closed chain, right, when your feet are on the ground, if all you did was move your hips. So remember, the whole point about being functional on your feet is to maintain your balance, to keep your center of mass over your base of support. Okay? If all I did, if I was doing a squat, and if all I did was move my hips, all I did was move my knees, point. It's like a hydraulic lift where they're all going to kind of work together, as my hips might want to sling me back. Lucky for me, my knees want to sling me forward, and they cancel each other out. No different than we were doing simultaneous movement strategies. And when I did the jab example for accuracy, elbows trying to go this way, shoulders trying to go this way, when they go at the same time, you can have translation. You can have accuracy. So I want you to take note of the simultaneous movement of going up and down, the accuracy involved, the maintaining your balance while you do squats, vertical jumps, these kind of things. And the brilliance of multi-articular muscles I'm just going to emphasize hamstrings, and I'm going to emphasize gastroc. So hamstrings, for the most part, membranosus, tendinosus, biceps femoris, long head, or hip extensors. They cross the knee and they insert somewhere around here, and they're knee flexors. Think of this, as you come up from squat, so let's say you come up and we're going to have concentrics of our hip extensors and our knee extensors. As the hamstrings shorten at the hip, what would they be doing at the knee? So when I come up, I'm going to have hip extension and knee extension, right? They're going to be flexing the knee. This is some weird stuff. Just roll with it, trust me. So I know that those hamstrings are going to shorten concentrically and do hip extension, right? But as I come up, my knees are extending. My point is that a lot of biarticular muscles shorten at one end at the same time as being lengthened on the other end. Think about that for a second. I'll give you the whys, but think about that for a second. My gastrocnemius, knee flexor and flexor. Or when I come up, I'm plantar flexing at my ankle, but I'm extending on my knee. Shortening, being lengthened. This happens all over the place. Erectus femoris. As it's shortening at the knee, it's being lengthened at the hip. Think about it. Hip flexor, knee extensor. Shorten, lengthen. Shorten, lengthen. The reason that those things happen is this. Let me give you 2 reasons. First one involves the length tension relationship that I showed you guys on those graphs, those the length tension relationships of muscles. But check this out, guys. Don't tell you. Tractile components, the actin, the myosin, that stuff, they have optimal ores in the water. They have optimal contribution to your work when they are at a certain position, when they're at resting tone. In other words, not too short and not too long. Does that make sense? The contractile components, the actin and the myosin, generate the most force when they're somewhere in the middle. Yes, longer is stronger when we stretch that muscle out, but that's because of just the stretchy rubber band like stuff. Stuff we can't control. It's only stretched and it wants to return to its original shape. So what's happening with these biarticular muscles is this overall representation of the filaments that are inside the muscle. You have one joint that's shortening the muscle while it's working. So it's trying to lessen its contribution because it's the overlap. But at the same time, the other end is being lengthened. So you have this cancel out effect where the muscle has more time to live in its optimal contraction state to generate contractile tension. Does that make sense? As you shorten one end, you lengthen the other end, so the overall muscle can stay more in its resting state. Not like at rest, but your resting position is where you have the most ores in the wall. So a lot of these biarticular muscles function in opposition so that that muscle doesn't get too short or too long. And notice I said you're shortening at one end and being lengthened on the other. It's being stretched because these other knee extensors are doing that. So it's not like that muscle is making me flex. It's just these knee extensors are extending, so the hamstrings at the knee are being lengthened here so that we can have a better active contraction from the actile components here. Does that make any kind of sense whatsoever? It helps your muscle stay in a better situation to generate actin and myosin overlap. Actin and myosin interaction. It helps you stay more here. While one articulating surface is trying to take you this way, The other does this, so that this plus this keeps you here. Best way to put it. In addition, so that's physiologically. That's all the stuff that I don't like, because I can't see it. Mechanically, this is awesome. Mechanically, what's happening is in a hydraulic lift, the knee is an illusion. What I mean by that is, when you're going up and down, you're going to have ankle motion, you're going to have knee motion, and you're going to have hip motion. The lower leg is part of the ankle, right? And the upper leg, the thigh, is part of the hip. So imagine if we can keep our balance. Imagine what would happen if I reached over, grabbed the lower leg, and pulled it this way. The knee and the hip would both move. Make sense? So when you're doing, anybody ever thought like people can squat like 1,000 pounds? Like what's the world record for squat? Like something like 1,000 pounds? It's ridiculous. It's a lot. Muscles only pull, but they pull on bones and bones can push. There's a reason we're stronger in pushing things than pulling things. And this is one of the magical ways we do it. Those hamstrings tugging on the lower leg right there, guys, is trying to move the ankle. Just like if I grabbed onto the lower leg and did this, the hamstrings are tugging on that lower leg. They're checking stability-wise. They want to contract to make sure you don't have this, right? ACL stuff. But in addition, they're pulling on that lower leg because they're trying to cause motion here, there, and there, all at once. The gastrocnemius, pulling on the upper leg, is trying to influence motion here, here, and there, all at once. They're all working together to influence motion on those three parts. There's zero waste. And my favorite one is the quads. So here's that patella. You have the quad tendon yanking this way, you have the patella tendon yanking this way. So I want you to imagine, this is really cool, I think. I want you to imagine how a bow and arrow works, where the string is pulling, but it's actually pushing on the arrow forward, right? It's pushing the arrow forward. On the knot, right? The string is pulling, but where the string contacts the arrow is actually translating and pushing the arrow forward, right? So when you're doing these squats, these loaded weight-bearing explosive jumps or squatting with a lot of force, one of the magical things you have is the quad is kind of like a bow and arrow. Muscles only pull, but they pull on bone and bone can push. And that patella is literally driving that femur, pushing that femur. Like if think of it like this, if you were doing a squat, you could, I'm not saying you should, but if you were spotting somebody on a squat and they're like Kelly Clarkson, you could go and just give a little push right there. It would beat them up. It would help get them up just by pushing on the front of their knees. Does that make any kind of logical sense? That's what your patella is doing. Your patella is pushing on that femur, which, oh, by the way, is very far away from hip and ankle, so you get great moment, you get great torque. In addition, it's that push, it's that drive that's creating all that darn friction and all that patella grind. That remember the other day in class we said, hey, flex and extend your knee. Do you feel any popping and grinding in there? It's tremendous amount of compression and friction. We try to minimize it. Highland smooth cartilage and fluid. But over time, water can wear away, and next thing you know, you got a Grand Canyon because of water drips. So the reason I'm telling you this isn't, I'm not going to ask these complex. This is what biomechanics can be on the next level. In addition, when you're in closed chain, they're all kind of working. It's like you have hip muscles, knee muscles, and ankle muscles, and they are a team within teammates. Ankle, knee, and hip, they're all like, guys, we need simultaneous movement. We need to work together to be able to jump explosively as we can or lift as much weight as we can. And there's some tricks mechanically that our body does in order to, again, squat a lot of weight. Look at this. Question, if he extended his knee, I mean, there's only about 5 or 10 degrees or so, but if he extended his knee, let's say he was at the end of his hip motion. If he extended his knee, do you think his hip is more likely to extend, or would he be able to flex more if he extended, if he blocked out his knee? Or would it have no effect on his hip? Again, assuming he's at the end of his hip motion. If he gave that knee a little bit more extension, do you think his hip would more or less likely do something? Okay, let's do a thought experiment. With me, guinea pig. All right, yoink. Here's what I'm trying to ask. But I'm not doing a very good job of it. That's not on you, that's on me. If I was here and I started extending my knee, do you think my hip would stay in the same position, or would my hip have to move? Absolutely, because I'm tight as a snare drum. And we can explain that by saying, well, my knee, as I flex, I get to put those hamstrings more in slack at the knee. They're not a limiting factor of hip position. So I can have more hip flexion when they're slack. But as soon as I start stretching them at both ends, I may run out of room really quick. So I have no choice but to extend the hip, put them on slack here so that I can get to the end position there. Put them on slack proximally so that I can let them get to an end position distance. That makes sense? So that's what I was trying to ask. If he extended, if he was at the end of his hip motion right there, and that's what's tough about sometimes doing these stretches on your own. It's hard to, fix one end while you're trying to move or stretch another. So if he was at the end of his hip motion, if he extended his knee, his hip is going to have to extend to get the same stretch, right? To get the same endpoint. And that's hamstrings. That's hamstrings. I wonder if it would help to do a lab. Yeah.
Someone to be like really flexible and they extend their knee they won't have to worry about what execution question mark?
Yeah, I think it depends, like if they're like circus acts, like if they're like hypermobile. And when we say hyper, just their range of motion, because their capsules don't have the same collagen as us. But everybody has an in. So theirs may be much further down, but yeah, this would be, but what's cool too is that if they're hypermobile, they probably don't need to be doing stretches, right? So we're looking at it from a patient, client, within normal limits, some of the things you might see. And one of the illusions is just because that joint, let's say I'm working with a client and I don't really understand those biarticular muscles. And I'm like, okay, your hip motion should be whatever. And I flex their knee to get their hip flexed as much as I want, not understanding that I totally took away the limiting factor of those hamstrings, right? So it's just kind of applying that kind of stuff, that if I'm trying to stretch his gluteus maximus, I'm not going to get that hip as far back to stretch the glute if my hamstrings are getting in the way, right? They're the limiting factor. So for the glute, I do want to flex the knee, get the hamstrings out, they're on slack, and now I can flex the hip more and maybe get some stretch on other muscles that may not have gotten. That's the extent of what I'm trying to ask you guys on the test. Are you hypermobile? Yes. Team tight hamstrings. It's really, and maybe it's unfair. Like my wife likes just stretching. For her, it feels good. For me, it's the most uncomfortable pain in the universe. So like this example really works for me, but it may not work for you. Where if my knees are extended and I flex my hips, I just get this shearing, shooting pain. And without messing with my hips, all I got to do is flex my knees just a little bit and it goes away. That's what we're trying to kind of see how those muscles are affected across multiple joints. Or I think I gave this example in class the other day, and I'll do it again. That's why, like for the sit and reach test, it's so important that we position their pelvis in a way so that their hips are flexed, and that way they can't. Oh, look at my! I have 90 degrees of flexion, right? But yet their pelvis is tilted back, and they're only flexed like this much. Makes sense? So like when I put my low back flat against the wall and I make sure that my hips are flexed at 90, I can't straighten my knees in. I think another good one is that rectus, like if you just stretch, if you just flex your knee, you're gonna feel something. But if you flex your knee and extend your hip, you feel a whole, it's an extra level of what you feel. And I can literally feel this muscle wanting to rip. So for us, again, origin, insertion, innervation, nerve, blood supply, that some of you guys may have to learn all that stuff. I did athletic training for 10 years. Never did I have to know most of that. Origin insertion for palpation, like you're trying to do special tests, right? You're trying to be like, okay, does it hurt here? Does it hurt there? Totally comes into play. But in terms of like rehab, exercise, stretching, manual muscle tests, exactly. Knowing what the muscles do as a function of how they pull, and then knowing that we have these special muscles that influence motion at multiple joints, and their contribution at individual joints can be affected by their positions at other joints. It's a useful tool that I think a majority of us could use. You know, if we don't, then you may have someone who thinks they're stretching a rectus optimally by doing, doing this. Well, the rectus is a knee extensor, we gotta flex the knee. And forgetting or not knowing that it also has hip function. And so what position do we need to put the hip? Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what's cool, again, I think it's like, it's two different ways of saying the same thing. If I want to emphasize the rectus, I want to extend my hip. But what if I don't? What if I'm trying to stretch the vastides? What if I have a strain to one of the vastides and I'm limited in my motion, I'm doing ice massage, I'm working on range of motion? Well, now I need to say, hey, rectus, you good. You're good. So in that regard, maybe I do want to flex the hip so that the rectus isn't my limiting factor. And I could get more knee flexion because it's not stopping my knee flexion. Because again, if I'm extended, there's no way I'm going to have as much knee flexion here than if it's slacked. That makes sense? So you could also go the inverse. You know, how do we lessen its contribution because there's other muscles I want to get up in there? Or how do we increase its contribution because I do want to isolate? And that's not just with stretch. That's with being an agonist as well. So, example, and I'm just using machines, but you can do this with manual resistance. You could also do this with, you know, with ankle cuffs. You just have to get creative. We talked about our moments. So we're working our knee extensors, right? Knee extensors, medialis, lateralis, intermedius, rectus. Would this position of her hips emphasize more rectus, or would it emphasize more vasti? Absolutely. Good application. The rectus is on slack at the hip. So it's, again, it's like taking a TheraBand and shortening on the front end. It's not going to pause much on the bottom end. But the vastis aren't affected by the hip position. So if you wanted to increase contribution of rectus as a knee extensor, you want to put the hip more in an extended position. Again, whether that's a TheraBand here, or even designing a machine where you could do a prone, work your knee extensors in a prone position where your hip is more extended. That would increase the rectus's contribution. And I think in class, I really do think this is one of the best, like you guys know more physics than we give our credit for. If you're struggling and you're in flex position, your natural instinct is to want to lean back. Your natural instinct is to want to lengthen here so that it pulls more there. You're taking the TheraBand, the rubber band, and you're doing this on the top so that it pulls more on the bottom. And none of this is saying that's a bad machine. That's an awesome machine. But to design these machines, you need to know how these muscles are affected by positions that are not just the joint that's being worked. Or adjustable. That's why you can adjust things as well. Cool. We're almost done. All right. I'll post the ankle stuff today, and so that way you'll have it. We already got gastroc, so all we got to do is look at the rest of the ankle and subtalars, and we'll hopefully do a lot more practice stuff too. Is this stuff starting to kind of sink in? Repeat. All right. All right. Y'all have a good one.